And we're live to discuss part 2 of Blood Ties, I think it's called. Over to Jeff.
And this one probably won't be super long because Ben is obviously tired, I can tell by us. So we won't want to get him too much into Colonel K territory. So, yes, this is Blood Ties Part 2, written by David Simon, Tom Fontana, and James Yoshimura, and directed by Nick Gomez. Originally aired October 24th, 1997. And I'm going to attempt to read David B. 226 Morris's summary/review. It's not one of his better ones, so I'm going to try to struggle through it here. You see, from the first sentence, his grammar doesn't make any sense. But anyway, here's what he says. Many who watched both parts of Blood Ties that we have seen before were stunned by the behavior of both Pembleton and Lieutenant Giardello towards the Wilsons, a wealth black family that has been a vital part of the community of Baltimore and whose domestic, Malia Briere, was murdered last week. That's one sentence. Okay.
It sounds like a robot, like an artificial intelligence program.
Yeah, maybe he was using the text-to-speech on this one. Speech to text, whatever. Anyway, Frank, who has been a ruthless and unyielding investigator, a man who believes that all victims deserve the same justice and that all suspects must be viewed through the same glass, seems unwilling or unable to look closely at this family as suspects in her murder. And G, a man who believes the detective should not be interfered with in the course of this investigation, goes to great lengths to protect the Wilsons, to the point of hamstringing detectives Guardian Ballard from getting blood and fingerprints from the Wilsons. In a purely rational sense, G's behavior is understandable, if not commendable. Regina Wilson is a friend. He admires Felix a great deal. This is the kind of thing some brass, including those on Homicide, would do. Furthermore, we have seen G run interference in some personal cases involving Pembleton, See No Evil in Season 2, the detective shooting in Season 3, but considering G's tendency to back up his detectives in high-profile cases from Indina Watson on up, it is somewhat difficult to believe that he would go to these lengths to protect the Wilsons. Frank's behavior is more surprising even to him. At one point, he and Bayless are going to talk to a Haitian immigrant at Felix Cake Plant. He talks for a long time about how he investigates all kinds of barroom brawls and drug killings involving blacks, so he knows the difference between bad black people and good black people. Tim agrees, but it seems more like Frank is trying to convince himself that's what he's doing here. Pembleton has always been an aggressive, tireless investigator, even when the people he's investigating are wealthy, see last season's Diener, so it seems uncharacteristic of him to be tiptoeing around the Wilson family. The other detectives, particularly Gardy, see it very differently. We didn't get a good look at Gardy during last week's episode, but we sure get one now. He has lived in Baltimore long enough to know that this is a black city. His view, however, is damn near close to bigoted. As he tells Ballard, he is sure that even if Frank wasn't the primary, the brass from G on up would be working to cover up whatever transgressions the Wilsons have committed. Though Ballard doesn't see it that starkly, she does know that Frank is not bringing his A game against the Wilsons. Frank and Tim spend several days trying to track down a vicious ex-boyfriend of Malia's rather than take even a quick look at the two male suspects right here in Baltimore. Ballard is particularly upset that Frank won't even consider bringing them in, if only to eliminate them as suspects. The very idea of tainting the Wilsons seems to gall him. And when Bayless, the man in the room with the clearest head, tries to suggest that they just do this quickly and cleanly, Pembleton sees this as a betrayal. Finally, Frank brings in Wilson for a discussion that in no way can be mistaken for one of his usual confrontations. This time, he's the one who gets floored when Wilson reveals that he had sex with Malia the night she was killed. Even then, he seems reluctant to press the matter until the Wilsons lawyer up and refuse to answer any further questions. Frank can't ignore it, but things are not going to move for another day. With everything going on, you think murder has stopped in Baltimore until Munch and Kellerman get called out on the ultimate red ball. A fan has been murdered at Camden Yards in the middle of an Oriole Day game. Turns out the deceased is an obnoxious Yankee fan from Long Island, so the stadium's full of suspects. It is important to remember that this episode was shot in 1997, the one season in the Yankees' string of 4 World Championships in 5 years that New York did not win its division. I'm not sure that that's really important, but anyway. The detective eventually stumbled on the killer, another Yankee fan from Long Island who murdered his friend and then came back to watch the game. That fan, by the way, was played by Brian Tarantino, who I've seen in multiple things, but I first knew him as Lucky Lippman from One Life to Live, a funnier character even than the one that he played on Homicide. When the detectives interrogate him, he promises he'll confess if they get him a hot dog and a beer. Nice to know the criminals are as stupid in New York as they are in Baltimore. We learn that the fan came to Baltimore hoping to see a rained-out Yankees-O's game, but his friend made a mistake. He then compounded the error by saying that the Orioles were a better team than the Yanks. Clearly not a great judge of his home team. The sequence is darkly amusing and shows the rivalry of the two teams. We even get a quick cameo by two members of the O's pitching staff at the time. Not bad, even though the Orioles had been eliminated from contention when this episode aired, making it a bit out of date. Just as last week, Peter Garrity and Richard Belzer were given short shrift. This time, Clark Johnson and John Seda get pushed to the backbench. In his few scenes, however, Falzone reveals he isn't through looking into the Mahoney shooting. Now he gets on Stiver's bad side, particularly ironic considering... Okay, that's just a little bit of a spoiler. But anyway, the crime's stain isn't going to go away no matter how much Lewis and Stivers wanted to. Ultimately, Blood Ties Part 2 brings us closer to the real Homicide than the top-heavy action-packed season premiere in the previous episode. You're getting what we usually find, good acting, rife with tension, particularly between Garrity, Thorne, and Brower, troubling issues and behaviors, and quirky humor from unlikely places. What else would you call our meeting Bayless's 8th grade French teacher? It's not the grade A prime we're used to, but this new unit with its new cast is starting to come together. Good things seem to lie ahead. My score, 8.6. So that's what he says. Ben, what say you?
Oh, dear.
Hopefully you weren't too tired to enjoy it.
Well, it sort of ties into what we were saying last week about, because we had a little discussion about Jeff thinking that, and that for him, and I believe it for him, that he believes that the middle episode out of the 3 should be the easiest to write. And
plot-wise, it is, yeah.
Yeah, plot-wise. That little nuance in there. But this episode...
Well, I mean, you still have to be able to come up with dialogue, obviously, which I think they did a pretty good job of in this episode.
But yeah, it's just sort of... And I was just as a recap, folks, for those writers that are very much plot-based, they can have a problem with writing the middle of a story because it's like they don't have enough plot, because it's like they tie things up in the final third, in the denouement, the act 3, and they don't know what to put in the middle because they've not got enough plot. Whereas this, I felt, well, hang on a minute, look, how have they stretched out this episode is by putting another story in it. And it's an entertaining story. The thing with the baseball and the hopefully atypical New Yorkers, although maybe not that atypical, unfortunately. So that was so that I regard that as entertaining filler.
Yeah, Baltimore is actually one of the few places with a higher murder rate than New York, so. Per capita, there's more people in New York, so the total number might be higher, but percentage-wise.
Yeah, and also over the years, New York's murder rate has gone up and down.
True.
Based on such.
At this time,
right.
In the 90s, it was actually down some.
Oh.
In the Giuliani era of New York City.
Yes, and what is it? Ray Kelly was the police commissioner that did all the stop and frisk stuff. I think.
Ray Kelly? I don't know. That doesn't sound right for some reason, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think he was the.
It was an Irish name, but I'm not.
Yeah, and maybe not Ray Kelly, but maybe somebody Kelly was. He became famous as the police chief that worked with Giuliani in New York to get the murder rate down. Anyhow, so yeah, I like the stuff with the investigation into sort of John Cedar's character, what's he called? The Valzone. His investigation into the and of course into into Culliman. So that's quite good, and you can see where that's going. Although they're probably not going to have the characters in too much trouble because series regulars. And I don't know if I've accidentally seen any bits of later episodes. Although I was also thinking, can we not have a little bit more James Earl Jones? He was only not in that many scenes in this.
True, but the ones
episode
he was in were pretty impactful, though.
Yes, that's true.
Especially the final one.
I think thematically it's good for the racial issues and good for pointing out things to do with Frank's characterization. That you have Frank the SP suddenly going, yeah, I'll have a baseball game. I'll have a basketball game with you on the fly. I don't care. I'll hold up the investigation.
And in fact, if Tim hadn't mentioned anything, he was going to play with his gun still on his holster too. It'd be like, Frank, your weapon. That would have been a bad accident waiting to happen if he got a hard foul.
Right. But as a story,
speaking of which, I think have some photos there. You could.
Yeah. I was just saying.
You could switch over to the picture of Frank on the basketball court because it looks like he got one.
Yeah, right there, and him being happy at that fact. So it's with seeing these, and I wanted to have a look at the crappy radio. Actually, not that bad a radio.
No, I think I had one that was pretty close to that. Lynn Thigpen, known by a lot of people in my generation as the woman from the chief from Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego.
I've never heard of that.
Well, it was actually a video game first, and then they made it into a TV show.
Right, so
on PBS.
Two things I've never heard of. Who's Tony Lewis?
You've never heard of video games? Tony
I've
Lewis
heard of
is Detective Stivers.
Right. Okay.
Ellen Bethea plays the daughter of the Wilsons. And Brian Tarantina is the obnoxious Yankee fan who killed the other Yankee fan.
Right.
And Armando Benitez and Scott Erickson were two members of the Baltimore Orioles at the time.
Right.
Both pitchers. And Jeffrey Wright plays Hal Wilson, Felix Wilson's son.
Right.
Might be one of those rare times I actually know who all of the guest actors play.
Right. Would it be revealed who the leaker is?
Are you asking me about future plots?
Ah, so maybe it will. David Simon. Right. Let's see. So what was I talking about before? You asked me to show some.
Oh well, you were talking about Frank
yes.
stopping to play basketball.
Yeah. So I got sort of this. So overall, the story is good. For in terms of the design of the story, the reason why I think it's good is because of it shows things about Frank. It puts him in certain positions and shows him what he values and the issues within him. And so it's good for showing his character, that there's more to him than just the SP things.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've obviously seen that plenty of times in the past as well, you know, his sort of moral fabric about things. And how to some people it could seem somewhat inconsistent. But then, you know, to typological veteran experts such as ourselves,
Yeah.
we see that, you know, we know that Frank's feeling is very personal and not as defined by society around him. So it's not as surprising that it would seem to other people to fluctuate somewhat.
Although but to me, there is a consistency of he is, throughout many episodes, to him, the politics of like people who do good in the black communities has been a feature of him. Like there is a racial chip on his shoulder that he has carried throughout the series, that comes up every now and then.
And if anything, in this episode, he sort of played to that he has a little bit of a bias. I would say in favor of wealthier black people. Like, even though he claims that everybody deserves the same justice, he sort of has a he sort of sees those people differently, as if they deserve. They've achieved something and so need recognition for it.
Not just that, I think he sees himself as a part of them.
Yeah.
In terms of class, if not, maybe not in terms of salary, but in terms of being an educated black man, I think he sees himself as part of that society.
Yeah, to a point, I think you're right that, you know, he sees it as, you know, there's a difference between the people that sort of rise above the circumstance, as opposed to those who simply sort of accept and roll with it.
Yeah.
In terms of they get into criminal behavior because they're in neighborhoods where that's common.
Yeah. Because, you know, he's quite dapper. He always has his tie on. He's well educated by what was his particular
Jesuits?
Yes, the Jesuits. We've taught the Latin and Greek because he was able to uncover the fake intellectual.
That's why, and I love some of David Simon's dialogue in this episode, especially the confrontation between him and Gardy, because it's funny because you have an instance where you have characters that are both make some good points. Both are say a few things where it's just sort of an emotional reaction.
Yeah.
And then they're also sort of talking past each other because they're both in a slightly misinterpreting what the other's coming from, because they don't know each other that well. Which is why, of course, Frank is more hurt by Bayless sort of going around him than he is by the other two, and he says that because he didn't, you know, he's sort of not seeing the others as, you know, that there's camaraderie yet between those, whereas feels like Bayless, they've been through all these things. And there's Lewis's fake Playboy.
Right, that's what I was wondering. Is when I saw Playpen, I thought, is that just the name for just a fake Playboy? Just I don't know.
Maybe.
Or is it real? Or is it real?
Not being an expert on such things. It's trying to sound like Lewis. I only read it for the interview with Garth Brooks.
Yeah. So is Playpen a real thing?
I just said I don't know.
Ah, okay.
Maybe it is. Because for the most part in Homicide, they tend to use real stuff as opposed to fabricating. One of the reasons it seems more realistic, because they don't, you know, if it were still around today, they probably wouldn't be saying things like my book or face space or whatever. Like some shows made up sort of combinations of those things rather than use the real names. they would probably be using the real names of stuff.
Yeah. Also, there might be like rights issues and things. We just don't know.
Well, yes, that's what it is. Is because obviously, whenever you have product placement, like there's legal issues involved. So, yeah, some will go to great lengths. I saw recently a General Hospital episode where they had a long shot of the snack bar or snack machine, and they really didn't have to linger that long on the snack machine, but they did, and I was able to see that like all of the snacks had been altered to different names than what they really were. It was pretty impressive that they took the time to do all those fake snack covers.
Well, it's the person doing it is thinking they want to work their way up. Get on to do some set dressing, set designing for movies.
And then we have the great where 3 attorneys have to show up for one to speak and hand him something.
Yeah.
Just trying to be trying to be intimidating by having the posse of lawyers.
Yeah, and 2 shorter ones as well.
Yeah, there's a little symbolism in that as well with the taller black lead attorney with the 2 white guys. Boy with beer. It's the part he was born to play.
Boy with beer is probably quite a bit older now.
Well, yeah, assuming he survived.
Yeah.
He would be. He would be about 20 years older.
And Rusty Klaus may or may not still be with us.
Yeah, wouldn't be surprised if she's not.
Boy with basketball.
Yeah, he actually did a little smack talking on Mr. Wilson.
Where's he?
When he airballed the shot.
30-something with basketball now.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, I really liked the confrontation with Pendleton and Gardy. I liked the baseball scenes. I liked the revelation with Felix in the box at the end. The way he sort of casually drops that. Well, I'm the one that had sex with her, but I didn't kill her. Because it complicates things, of course. Because the initial thought, most of the time with the detectives, when somebody says that, their thought is, he's probably lying. He probably was the one who killed her. Now we need to nail him in the box. But of course, that doesn't happen. They just let him go, as Frank is so stunned about that. And then, of course, he's thinking at that point, well, we can go on to the next step. But then the lawyers get involved and basically are like, no, you're not going to get any cooperation from us anymore. So they've basically. It sort of, in a way, confirms both of what they were thinking, or both sides of them. Like the detectives that wanted to go after the Wilsons, the one that didn't, because it's like, on the other hand, they're like, get him in the box and interrogate him and stuff. But the problem is that they could have done this from the beginning as well, and not gotten any of the information at all. He could have done it even before telling him that I'm the one that had sex with him. Like, basically, could have just said, we're not telling you anything, and so. You can kind of understand where, maybe you can say there's a bit of a bias or we were protecting the family, but there's also an element too, and I think even Bayless said this in the first part, something about like if you go after them too hard, they might just, not cooperate at all. And so you have both elements of that in play. So it makes it a very complex situation. And I thought it was interesting, in fact, there's a little bit of a sexism involved too, because there's this assumption that if it's a member of the family, it has to be one of the 2 male members rather than either of the mother or the daughter. They never even get mentioned as being possible suspects. So I think that's interesting as well, that there's all those elements involved at the same time.
Yes, because, they don't think, one just found out she was having sex and then...
Right, because my immediate thought was when he drops the, okay, I had sex with her, but I didn't kill her. My first thought is, wife finds out and kills her. But yet nobody says that, at least not in this episode. So, that was my, if my immediate thought of it is it wasn't him.
Well, you have watched those soaps though, Jeff, where that may have happened.
Well, no, but I mean that's a really common thing though. Jealous wife or girlfriend or whatever, finds out they're cheating, that's a pretty common thing. So, so it's a little bit surprising that nobody says that, at least yet. Obviously I don't remember everything that's said in the next episode, but I will say, without really spoiling anything, that the third part, although I don't enjoy it quite as much as the second one, I would say it has a typically Homicide, satisfyingly unsatisfying conclusion.
Good. Will I be able to? Will I be hearing more from James Earl Jones?
Well, at least in the next episode, you will. Yes.
Good. Oh, dear. And so, it's your favourite of the three?
Yeah.
So, what do you like about it, Jeff? You've asked me.
Well, I just said a lot of it. Were you not listening? So I like the conflict. The tension between the detectives. I like Brian Tarantino as the Yankee fan, and most of those scenes are pretty good.
Right.
I like the authenticity of the stuff about the baseball, as well as the security and calling the governor and all that kind of stuff, and the French teacher, and all the little details of that. I think David Simon is like big on having the little realistic details of stuff, including things that annoy people. The minutia of things, because he's said in the interviews, like, kind of his role was like reminding them that this is that most police work is actually kind of repetitive and boring. But obviously, in a TV show, you don't want it to be boring so that the audience tunes out. But you have to find a way to make repetitive, boring stuff seem interesting, to seem like it's got something in it that makes it worth watching. So you have those elements of kind of having to keep it exciting and interesting enough, but still trying to make the little elements work. I mentioned before we started this, when we were talking about the length of seasons, that Seinfeld, also had a short 4-episode season. I think as far as, in a comedy show, Seinfeld kind of did that same thing, where they tried to find humor in stuff that was kind of daily life things that most shows didn't tend to focus any time on. But they would say, no, there's some humor to find in this thing that doesn't seem like it would be interesting. And so there's a little bit of that same, there's a little bit of that same goal with Homicide, is, trying to find the little sort of intricacies that are funny or interesting about police work. So, the stuff about the newspaper leaks, again, it's just sort of a little detail that in itself wasn't really an exciting story to me, in terms of like that part of it, that element of it is not that interesting to me. But the one thing about this episode is we didn't have, we had the defense lawyers at the very end for the Wilsons, but we didn't have any of the any discussion with the prosecuting side of the attorneys in this episode. We didn't have Danvers or what's her face, the main woman, that attorney that they talked to. So they hadn't gotten to the stage where they're discussing that. But I think, if I remember right, at least one of them's in the next one. So anyway, we'll get that element sort of introduced. And we also had, of course, we didn't really spend any time on it yet in this one, a little bit more about Mahoney and ramifications of that. Surprisingly, not really at all mentioned by Kellerman. It was only Stivers and Lewis and Falzone. But you saw Stivers actually, contrary to some other parts, scenes past or future, in this one she actually was pretty solid in standing up for Lewis when she was talking to Falzone, but basically implying he was kind of wrong for trying to investigate his partner behind his back, saying you either trust him or you don't. So I thought that was a pretty good scene between the two of them.
Yeah, that was where she sort of implied he might be gay. It's a joke, I suppose.
Oh, I don't think she was seriously trying to imply that. Yeah, but the thing that got me though is that every time he says something, he questions something about that he was beaten. I don't know why all of them don't just say that yeah, Lewis did beat him up. It just took his gun after that because that was the truth. And I'm not sure why they didn't want to admit that, because I don't think they were. It didn't seem like they would be worried that that aspect of it would somehow conflict with their report that the shooting was clean.
Yeah, and
So
also
it's a little bit surprising that they don't just respond. You know, the Lewis. I think Kellerman, out of all of them, probably when Falzone first, he would have been the one to say, yeah, Lewis did beat him up. He would have said that out front. But I guess he was more interested in sticking to this isn't any of your business, just look at the report or whatever if you want to know what happened kind of thing, as opposed to defending certain elements of it. But yeah, in general, I think it was a good, solid episode. It had a lot of good conflict, good dialogue. It moved along at a decent pace. Where when it was concluding, right, the final scene, I could tell like right before, when they had the characters sort of stare off in the distance at the camera, I was like, okay, that's probably going to be the end. But I didn't remember exactly when it ended, so it came, fairly quickly. So I didn't feel like the episode dragged at any point. So it was well paced.
how much did your interest in baseball affect your enjoyment of the
Not a lot, because even though they threw some details in there that I thought were good, that they had those and they made sense. Because sometimes you have shows that they like try to throw in references, but they botch them, so they just sound stupid. In this case, everything was right on target, including the Yankee fan, responding to that typical thing where somebody says, "Oh, they only won the World Series because of that play, like where the kid reached over the fence," and like the thing is that they could have still even won that game if that hadn't happened, much less could have won the series. So people would say that kind of thing, the same kind of thing that people say about the '86 World Series when the ball went through Buckner's legs. People act like if that hadn't happened and he had picked up the ball and stepped on the bag, then the Red Sox would have won the World Series. But that's not true. The Mets had already tied the game. So all that would have done was it would have gone into another inning, tied, which the Mets still could have won in the next inning. So to act like he was responsible for them losing the World Series is ridiculous. So yeah, I like the fact that they had that, in this episode of him responding to that in the way that a Yankee fan would, in terms of reminding them that, hey, that wasn't the only thing that happened in that series. It was wrong for that to have happened, but it wasn't the only thing that happened.
a half truth?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I like the fact they involved the baseball stadium, but I don't think, I think even, at the time I watched this, I was not necessarily super into baseball at the time. I've kind of gone, up and down in my baseball enjoyment over the years. So, so I don't remember specifically what I thought about any of the actual baseball related stuff. I wasn't like fanboying about the two Oriole guys they showed, of course. I've never really been an Orioles fan, so that aspect wasn't. And I guess here's a good time for me to tell my little anecdote. It won't take long.
Okay.
For my SP cred.
Excellent.
Because I've told this story before, but I'll say it again briefly. Is that when I was 5 years old, my family lived in Catonsville, Maryland, which is right outside of Baltimore, in Baltimore County, for about 9 months. It was a very short time. It was like Christmas of one year of 1981 until summer of '82, in between job locations for my father. To this day, I don't know exactly why we only moved there for that short time, though. But anyway, we did. And that was where I bought my first baseball hat. Like, I guess I was given enough of an allowance or some kind of, money to buy something at this store that we went to. And they had a rack of baseball hats. And, like I said, we're living right in the Baltimore area. So all of them were Oriole hats, except one. There was one Yankees hat. I had never seen a baseball game, as far as I know at that point. Did not know who the Orioles or the Yankees were, had no actual interest in any of it. But I bought the Yankees hat because it was the one that was different. So there you go. There's my rebellion was all these Orioles hats, and I'm going to get the Yankees hat because it's the one that stands out and doesn't fit with the crowd. So yeah, even though I've never been a Yankees fan, the very first baseball hat I got was a Yankee hat.
With do you think this is an episode for showing things about Frank that about Frank and G, where it's just a case of, yes, temperament's important, but here's an example of like stuff that's important to both of these characters that's not temperament related.
Sure. But I think you still do, as you even pointed out, see elements of their temperament in this episode. The way G sort of looks at it is kind of a circle the wagons around the friends, the family, and Pembleton is kind of seeing it like he has to sort of justify himself as that he's still doing his job as a detective, but he just needs a good reason to go after the family, as opposed to seeing himself as protecting them, like G does. So there's still a difference there.
And also, Frank's looking at the bigger picture because he's mentioned, and even when you got the guy talking to him in the factory, the emigre from Haiti, where Frank, what's in the back of Frank's mind all the while is all the good work that James Earl Jones's character has done for the black community.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he's mentioned that before. He may have mentioned that in a previous episode, where he's mentioned good work in the black community by somebody as a factor that he thinks is very important.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I'm glad that they had a high-profile case that wasn't involving Frank, because there were a lot that did over the years. So the Luther Mahoney stuff always was more of a Lewis and Kellerman thing during the time that they were going after him. But it would have been interesting to see how Frank would have handled Mahoney cases, because he's brief when they first introduced him. Frank mentions that he had at least one case where he tangled with him before, but we don't actually ever see it. But that was another case where Mahoney was both known to people as a drug dealer, but also known to be somebody who was a philanthropist in the community. So he had that double thing going. Whereas in the Wilson's case, as far as any of the public's concerned, there's no negatives. He's seen entirely as a positive figure.
Yeah, and also it's over a longer period of time, I suppose.
Right.
And of course, the Frank character is in his 30s, I believe.
Yep.
And so he would have seen quite a bit more of that. Also, yes, because the Frank character is in his 30s, in the 1990s, he's more connected to more of the racism in the past than the younger guys. Because, like, say they brought the show back, that same character is that it'd be the Frank character would be in his 50s, and you'd say, oh, here's a character that can remember back. So,
yeah, I said a while back that I was wishing Homicide was still around when all the riots in Baltimore were happening, because I know they would have tackled that on the show.
when were those riots?
Oh, don't put me on the spot with not knowing my news dates. You keep up with stuff more than I do.
Was it which president?
Which president?
Yeah, who was in the White House with the Baltimore riots?
Well, it would have been Obama.
Right. Okay. Right then.
And if they'd stayed on the air for, all this time since then, we could have had some scenes with Martin O'Malley when he was mayor of Baltimore too, or he was a presidential candidate.
Right. Right. I don't know what else I've got to say about this episode.
All right, then I guess just your score out of 10.
I'll give it. I'll give it an 8 because of there was a surprise ending somewhat with James Earl Jones's character. The filler material with the baseball was amusing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like Brian Tarantino. I would almost say that I was when you asked me over how much my enjoyment of baseball affected my enjoyment of that scene. I almost say my enjoyment of Brian Tarantino affected it more because I think he's really good. So I enjoy him playing almost anybody.
In fact, did it make you like baseball more?
Not really, but it made me have maybe a slight twinge of sympathy for Yankee fans, which I because he was just a good representative.
Yeah, it's just like
which is funny because a Yankee fan could take that as a compliment or an insult, either one.
They're like Manchester United fans, where they just like won too much, and like anyone who has become a fan, it's like
no. But honestly,
how can I judge your loyalty?
I like Yankee fans better than Cardinal fans when it comes to baseball because Cardinal fans are the one that have the unjustified reputation for being they're the greatest fans in baseball. They're so respectful and knowledgeable. They're just as obnoxious as any other fan. In fact, some of them are worse. So.
Yeah, I don't know why. Why? I mean, it seems that baseball fans in the United States they need to have a bit more class of other sports.
Well, honestly, they need to have.
It's just a culture thing.
They need to take the officials need to take control of the game. See, like in football, basketball,
penalties.
The officials take control and say, look, we're not going to put up with this when people in the crowd start throwing things on the field and stuff like that. In baseball, they act like they can't do anything. The umpires just say, okay, take the teams off the field, and they just wait.
Yeah, because there's no way to penalize the teams. There's no...
Yeah. Honestly, I would get on the thing and say, if you don't start throwing stuff, don't stop throwing stuff in this amount of time, you forfeit the game. Your team forfeits the game. Give them a real threat.
Well, I tell you what, Jeff, they really got at them in cricket for stuff like this. Is they brought in somebody above the umpire, the match referee, someone who was powerful enough to fine the players and ban players for games.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's a whole other rant, but you gave it an 8. I gave it a 9 for an average of 8.5. And join us next week for Blood Ties Part 3.
That's good. That's good for easy to name. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye-bye.